Hello and welcome to It's the Bees, the channel where I take you through my journey of becoming a beekeeper. In the first two episodes, I focused on cleaning an old hive and acquiring a bee suit. In these episodes, there was a distinct lack of bees, probably the most important part of any bee-themed channel. But I hope to change this in this episode, Getting Bees. As a preface to this episode, I couldn't have done any of the activities in this video without help, advice and equipment lending of experienced beekeepers. I was severely out of my depth, partly because I wasn't doing anything by the book, so to speak. If you are just starting out beekeeping, I thoroughly recommend finding a mentor who can guide you through the often overwhelming processes of starting a new colony. I do not recommend doing this alone the first time. With the hive cleaned, protective equipment ready to go, I turned my focus to getting bees. At the start of filming for this episode, it was late April. During spring, bee colonies get stronger after winter, and with this came my chances of getting my own colony through various different routes. As I saw it, there are two main methods of getting my first colony of bees: acquiring bees from local or online beekeeping groups, or capturing a wild swarm. As it happens, I managed to do both. One of the most popular methods of starting a hive is to buy what's called a nucleus colony. A nucleus, or nuke for short, is a small colony of bees that has been split from a main colony. Essentially, a nuke is a starter pack of bees contained in a mini hive. I'd recently joined the local beekeeping association, and an email had been sent round for expressions of interest for buying nukes from other members later on in the year. Needless to say, I signed up straight away. The cost of these nukes was around £160, not the cheapest method, but the nukes would be overwintered already, so must be fairly strong. However, a couple of months of waiting, no offer presented itself, and eventually I received an email from the association indicating that it had been a tough year for the bees and there were unlikely to be any nukes available in the near future. I had to turn my search elsewhere. Some of my family have a history of beekeeping, and throughout my local area there are a number of colonies that have been reared by various different family members. I'd had my eye on one colony in particular, because it had not been tended to in a couple of years, and I thought it'd be a good chance to take over management of it. It was located a few miles down the road from my home. The first problem with this abandoned colony was that it was situated right in the middle of an overgrown patch of brambles. The first use of my newly purchased bee suit, therefore, was thorn protection. Beyond the thicket was an abandoned hive, complete with seasoned bees. After permission from the owners, I went about bringing it up to spec. My first job was to clear a path to the hive. I could have done this the old-fashioned way, with hand tools, but, contrasting the statements in my previous videos about starting this journey with minimal tooling, I opted for an easier method, the tool for which happened to be sitting idle nearby. Once I'd cleared the path, I recruited the help of an experienced beekeeper who'd recently shown me around his own hives, so he'd already developed a rapport. I helped this beekeeper take apart my dilapidated boxes in order to put the bees into something more homely. This was my first real experience of diving into a hive, and it felt chaotic, but really enjoyable. Although I had nothing to compare it to, I was told that these bees were reasonably friendly, although they were understandably quite annoyed that we were disturbing their home. I was assured afterwards that by taking on this particular hive, I'd thrown myself in the deep end. I previously described the hive that I'd been given as ropey, but that was nothing compared to this. The boxes were falling apart and the frames were cobbled together using a mismatch of woodwork techniques.
They're very, yes, there's a huge amount of comb suspended underneath.
Within the hive, the bees had made their own so-called wild comb below the man-made frames. The first job was to remove this wild comb and place it somewhere else temporarily. We had to remove it to ensure the frames would sit inside the new brood box we prepared. There was a lot of it, so we had to resort to some heavy-duty tools.
Right.
The bees were understandably quite annoyed with this. We then placed the old frames in the brood box I cleaned up in the first episode.
Right. That's the best we can do with those.
Next, we used the components from the hive I cleaned up in the first episode to put the old frames into something cleaner and more easily inspectable. This included the cleaned brood box, floor and frames.
Well done. I'll just take... Okay.
The top one.
Lovely.
Some of the frames from the old box were broken beyond repair, so we had to replace these with new frames containing new foundation. The foundation gives the bees a head start when creating new comb. In a second brood box, we stacked the wild comb we removed earlier as best we could. There was still brood, that is, bee eggs and larvae, in this wild comb, so it was worth keeping in the hive until it had all hatched. This second brood box needed a bit of in situ maintenance to close up gaps. We closed up the hive and left them to it. In the subsequent weeks, I occasionally fed the bees using a mixture of white sugar and water. I also enlisted the advice and help of another experienced beekeeper within the family, who helped me inspect the hive and find the queen. Once we had located her, no easy task mind you, we trapped her in a so-called crown of thorns, and this allowed us to paint her with a white dot to allow easy location in future inspections. There is only one queen in a colony of tens of thousands of bees. She is the mother of all bees in the colony. She can be differentiated from other bees because she's fairly long and she's larger than the worker bees. After a month or so, the brood in the wild comb had all hatched, and we were able to remove this. The comb could be melted down into beeswax and used for various things including candle making and new foundation. My plan was to move this whole hive to my own back garden, and I was almost at that point. Then, however, something very unexpected happened. During the time I was looking after the abandoned colony, I was kindly given a second empty wooden hive. The second hive was in a really bad way, so I took it to my house and temporarily left it on my patio in preparation to conduct the same cleaning process I undertook in episode 1. And then, one sunny Wednesday morning, I woke up to this. A wild swarm of honeybees had sniffed out the ropey hive and decided to make it their home. They were likely attracted to the smell of the previous occupants. The thousands of bees that are in the air in this clip, including the queen, all entered the hive, and less than 5 minutes later it was as if nothing had happened, although there was now a small buzz of activity around the entrance to the hive. This was fantastic. My own wild colony had moved in with no effort on my part. I couldn't believe my luck. The only problem was that it was right next to my front gate. Not an ideal position for a colony of tens of thousands of bees. Over the next few days, I once again enlisted the help of a more experienced beekeeper to rehome the bees in a better hive. I'm relying a lot on the kindness of friends to lend me kit in these scenarios. A similar chaotic process to the first ensued, although this time in much worse weather conditions. The bees hate the wind and rain, but we had to get this done before they settled into the dirty old hive. We couldn't spend the time looking for the queen, but we had a rough idea of where she was based on the sheer number of bees surrounding a particular area of the floor. As long as we got her into the new box, the other bees were sure to follow. We brushed the suspect pile of bees into the new brood box with a feather, along with other clusters that were sticking to the old hive components. We then closed up the hive and gave the bees a well-deserved rest. However, I was still stuck with the issue it was situated right next to my front gate. I had to put a warning sign up to tell unsuspecting visitors to stay cautious. There's a rule of thumb in beekeeping that dictates how far you should move bees at any one time, namely less than 3 feet in a day or more than 3 miles. Without going into detail, this rule is dictated by the fact that bees have memory of the hive's location, and if the hive is moved greater than 3 feet or less than 3 miles, the bees will try to return to their old location, get lost, and die. My preferred hive location was in my back garden, and it was roughly 150 feet away. This means it would take me 50 days to move the hive to this new location at a rate of less than 3 feet per day. Not ideal. The alternative would be to move the hive more than 3 miles away for a few weeks, and then back to my preferred location once the bees had lost the memory of the old location. Again, not ideal, particularly as I wasn't that keen to put a hive full of bees in my car. Luckily, a very experienced beekeeper came up with a fast-track idea that was only possible due to the unique circumstances I was in. Firstly, the colony had only recently moved into the hive, so it wasn't very accustomed to its location anyway. Secondly, the weather over the next few days was predicted to be cold and wet, and this helped with what I needed to do. Seal the bees within the hive for a few days while they lost their memory of the old location. The cold, wet weather would ensure the bees wouldn't overheat while locked in. By nightfall, all the bees were back in the hive and wouldn't try to exit again until dawn. It was at this point I could seal the entrances to the hive with twisted grass and gaffer tape in the knowledge that I wasn't locking any bees out. I then strapped together the hive, recruited an unsuspecting friend, and carried the hive one step at a time to the new location in the back garden. This was a particularly tense moment because any wrong step or slip, bear in mind it was raining heavily, would mean a dropped hive and YouTube comedy gold. Sadly for you, we managed to move the hive uneventfully to the new position.
Perfect. Well done.
Well done.
Wow.
Thanks, guys.
Good job.
I had to keep the bees sealed inside for 24 hours at least, giving them their own experience of COVID-19 lockdowns. The bees could eat through the grass slowly and eventually let themselves out over the next day or so. Throughout these couple of days, the bees would have lost their memory of the hive's previous position and started afresh from the new location. I now had my very own colony of bees in my very own garden, although it's debatable whether you can truly own bees. The other colony I talked about has remained where it is, and I'll help manage it from afar for now. So that was the process of getting my first 2 colonies of bees. Neither one was the usual method by any means, but exciting for me nonetheless. Thank you for watching, and I hope you found this process interesting and informative. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have in the comments section below. Bye for now.